Well, the big news out of COP28, of course, was the long anticipated and long awaited agreement to set up a loss and damage fund.
I think for me, there's one overarching achievement of COP28, and that was the operationalization of the loss and damage fund.
So from COP28, I believe the key outcomes that were particularly relevant for our African built environment sector include Buildings Breakthrough platform or initiative.
Well, the big news out of COP28, of course, was the long anticipated and long awaited agreement to set up a loss and damage fund, which in short basically provides funding for low income countries facing unavoidable economic losses due to climate change. This took many years of negotiation, and it's important recognition that there is a need to step up financial support for countries that, regardless of what they are currently doing to mitigate and adapt to climate change, face unavoidable economic losses. So that's the good news. The challenge, of course, is that the actual sort of meat on the bones, if you wish, with the loss and damage fund leaves a lot to be desired. My understanding is that the commitments so far are something in the region of 790 million US dollars. And anyone who pays any attention to the financing needs that not just Africa has, but the world has, will immediately recognize that this is nowhere near enough to meaningfully tackle the big picture challenge of climate change. However, that said, it is also reflective of how the global narrative around climate change is shifting. Because the reason we now have a loss and damage fund is because the so-called, and I use this term reluctantly, the so-called developing world over the last 30 years has become a much more important part of the global economy, and that voice is increasingly coming through in platforms like COP28. So I think overall, big picture, very important step. But of course, when we look at the details, there's still a lot of work to do.
I think for me, there's one overarching achievement of COP28, and that was the operationalization of the loss and damage fund. I think that the operationalization of that and the funding being provided and accordingly managed towards actually helping the African ecological system to deal with some of the effects of climate change, which seem to be impacting the African continent most significantly, especially being the continent that has, I mean, I don't like to say this, but in general, among the poorest populations in the world, I think at present it's believed that over 800 million people around the world don't have access to electricity or modern energy, and 600 million of those are on the African continent. So I think that the loss and damage fund, in order to be able to impact what is primary economic activity across the African continent, to me was probably the most significant outcome of COP28.
So from COP28, I believe the key outcomes that were particularly relevant for our African built environment sector include the Buildings Breakthrough platform or initiative that was really championed by the government of France and Morocco with the backing of the United Nations Environmental Programme. There you also have a whole host of African countries that have joined and signed on to that initiative. It includes countries such as Kenya, it includes Zambia, I believe Egypt is also on there. So it's about 8 different countries who have joined this initiative, which is very, very exciting. This initiative is basically these countries agreeing that they are setting decarbonization targets for their built environment sector, and they are also committing to that by 2030 they will have zero emissions buildings becoming the new normal. You also have other regions like the US and Canada coming on board and joining this particular initiative. It's very exciting. I think it provides a good platform for us as African built environment professionals to start to share knowledge, to collaborate a little bit more. And from that specific Buildings Breakthrough event for our sector, I just wanted to highlight what their key focus areas will be. There are 5 specific focus areas. The first one is capacity and skills building or skills development. The other one is standards and certifications. The third one is demand creation. The fourth one is research and development. And I believe the fifth one is finance and investment. So through these 5 focus areas, I think it's particularly very exciting for African built environment professionals, organizations, countries to come together and drive collaboration between the global north and the global south in terms of making sure we set targets for decarbonizing our built environment sector.